My wife told me she was pregnant, but I'm infertile. Turns out the father is my brother, who manipulated her while I grieved my dad's death. I, 32M, need to get this weight off my chest and maybe get some advice on how to handle this mess. I'm Robert, 32, working as a senior software engineer at a tech company in Boston. I've always been the quiet, responsible type, focused on my career and family. Family has been everything to me, especially my relationship with my dad who recently passed away. I grew up in a close-knit family in suburban Massachusetts. My older brother Nate, 37M, and I were raised by loving parents who always emphasized family values. Despite our 5-year age gap, Nate and I were pretty close growing up. He was the outgoing, charismatic one who went into business and real estate, while I was more introverted and got into technology. We had different personalities but complemented each other well. Nate was my best man at my wedding, and I always looked up to him as my big brother. I met Carol, 30F, at a friend's New Year's party 5 years ago. She worked in marketing and had this infectious energy about her. I'm usually reserved at social gatherings, but she got me talking about my work in AI, and before I knew it, we'd spend hours just chatting. She brought out a side of me I didn't know existed. We started dating, and everything just clicked. She understood my passion for technology, and I admired her creativity and social skills. After 2 years of dating, we got married in a small ceremony. Everyone in my family adored Carol, especially my dad. He always said she was the daughter he never had. Carol fit right into our family dynamics. She and my brother's wife Olivia, 35F, became close friends despite their different personalities. Olivia is a pediatric nurse, more serious and career-focused, while Carol was all about socializing and having fun. They would go shopping together, have weekend brunches, and plan family gatherings. We all lived within 30 minutes of each other and had weekly family dinners at my parents' house. Life was great until last year when Dad started having persistent coughs and chest pain. The diagnosis hit us like a truck, stage 4 lung cancer. Dad had never smoked a day in his life, which made it even harder to accept. I took it particularly hard because Dad and I had this special bond. Every Sunday morning, we'd go fishing together, just the two of us. He'd tell me stories about his youth, give me life advice, or sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence. Even after I moved out and got married, I called him every day on my drive home from work. Watching him deteriorate was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. Within months, he went from this strong, active man who could spend hours in his workshop, to someone who needed help walking to the bathroom. I spent every free moment at the hospital with him. Carol would come with me sometimes, but I could tell the hospital environment made her uncomfortable. She'd usually leave after an hour or so, saying she had work to catch up on. Dad passed away 3 months ago. The last few weeks were brutal. He was in so much pain despite the morphine. The night he died, I was at home trying to get some sleep after spending 48 hours at the hospital. I still feel guilty about not being there when he took his last breath. Mom says he waited until everyone left because he didn't want us to see him go. After Dad's death, I fell apart. I couldn't sleep, could barely eat. I'd go to work because I had to, but I was just going through the motions. I'd spend hours after work just sitting in our backyard, looking at the fishing rod Dad gave me for my 30th birthday. Carol tried to get me to talk about my feelings, but I couldn't. How do you put into words the feeling of losing someone who was your father, mentor, and best friend all rolled into one? That's when Nate suggested Carol and I move in with him and Olivia for a while. Their house was closer to my workplace, and he said being around family would help me heal. Carol agreed immediately, saying the change of environment would do me good. Looking back, I should have noticed how quickly she jumped at the idea, but I was too lost in my grief to see anything clearly. We moved into their guest bedroom, and initially, everything seemed normal. I was still deeply depressed, spent most evenings in their backyard just staring at nothing. Carol would try to engage me in conversation, but I just couldn't respond the way she wanted. I knew I was being distant, but I couldn't help it. Everything reminded me of Dad. About a month into our stay, I started noticing changes in Carol's behavior. She began spending a lot of time with Nate, saying she was helping him organize paperwork for his real estate business. Olivia worked long hours at the hospital, often doing night shifts, so it wasn't unusual to find Carol and Nate working in his home office. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I trusted them both completely. Last week, everything came crashing down. Carol told me she was pregnant. She was smiling, expecting me to be happy, but all I felt was confusion and then a growing sense of dread. You see, I'm infertile. We discovered this 2 years ago when we were trying for a baby. Multiple tests confirmed it. Carol knew this. We'd gone through all the fertility counseling together, discussed adoption, even started looking into IVF options. When I reminded her of this fact, her smile disappeared. She started crying, saying she was sorry, that it just happened, that she was lonely because I was so distant. I felt like I was in some kind of nightmare. But it got worse. When I asked who the father was, she broke down completely and admitted it was Nate. My own brother. The person who suggested we move in with them. The same brother who held me at Dad's funeral and promised to always look out for me. The same brother who sat across from me at dinner every night while sleeping with my wife behind my back. When I confronted Nate, he tried to deny it at first. But Carol had already confessed everything. Their affair started just 2 weeks after we moved in. They would wait until Olivia was at work and I was lost in my grief in the backyard. Sometimes they met during the day when I was at work. In my father's house. Where we grew up. Where we shared so many memories. Now Carol is trying to play victim. Says Nate manipulated her, took advantage of her emotional state. Claims he pursued her, convinced her that I didn't care about her anymore. Nate is denying this version, says she came on to him, that she initiated everything. I honestly don't care who made the first move. They both betrayed me in the worst possible way. I packed a bag and moved out immediately, went to stay with my friend Jake. Filed for divorce the next day. Carol keeps calling, texting, showing up at my workplace begging for forgiveness. Says she'll terminate the pregnancy if that's what I want, as if that would somehow fix everything. I blocked her number and told security at work not to let her in. Olivia found out yesterday. She came to see me, crying, asking if I knew how long it had been going on. She's completely devastated. Packed her bags and left for her parents' house in Seattle. Nate's been calling everyone in the family, trying to do damage control. Says it was a mistake, that he was grieving too. What a joke. He seemed perfectly fine planning family dinners while sleeping with my wife. I keep thinking about my dad. He loved Carol like his own daughter. Always told me how lucky I was to have found someone who brought out the best in me. Would he have ever imagined she would do this? That his own son would betray his brother like this? Sometimes I'm glad he's not here to see his family fall apart like this. I don't know what to do now. Every time I close my eyes, I see them together. In my brother's house. While I sat outside, drowning in grief for our father. How do you even begin to process something like this? How do you move forward when the two people you trusted most betray you in the worst possible way? Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone for their support on my original post. The advice and encouragement helped me stay focused during what have been the worst 2 weeks of my life. A lot has happened since then, and unfortunately, things have only gotten worse. After staying at Jake's place for a week, I decided it was time to deal with the apartment situation. Carol had been living there alone since I left, sending me messages about how she was sorry and wanted to talk. I ignored all of them. Jake and I went to the apartment early last Saturday morning to pack up her things. I texted her the night before telling her I'd leave her stuff outside and that she needed to be gone by the time I got there. When we arrived, the apartment was a mess. Empty takeout containers everywhere, clothes scattered around, and pictures of us still hanging on the walls. It felt surreal seeing our wedding photo still displayed above the fireplace, this happy couple smiling at the camera, not knowing what was coming. I took it down first and threw it in a box. While Jake and I were packing, Carol showed up. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days. She started crying right there in the doorway, saying she had nowhere to go, that her parents lived 3 states away, and she couldn't afford a hotel. I didn't care. Told her she should have thought about consequences before sleeping with my brother. She tried to come inside but Jake blocked the door. Said if she didn't leave, we'd call the police. She left after that, but stood in the parking lot watching us pack her things. We boxed everything up and left it outside under the building's covered entrance. I texted her that she had until 5 p.m. to collect it all or it would go to Goodwill. Then I changed the locks. Watching Jake load box after box of our shared life together, I felt numb. 7 years of memories, reduced to cardboard boxes on a curb. But that wasn't even the worst part of the week. The real bombshell dropped when my mom called Monday night. She was hysterical. Apparently, Nate had gone to see her, spinning his own version of events. He told her Carol had been pursuing him for months, even before Dad got sick. Said she would wear revealing clothes around him, find excuses to touch him, send him flirty texts. According to him, she planned the whole thing, wanted to get pregnant by him because he was more successful than me. He painted himself as this victim who succumbed to temptation after months of her seduction. Mom, who was still grieving Dad and looking for someone to blame, believed him completely. She was furious at Carol, called her terrible names, said she had destroyed our family. Mom even suggested that maybe this was for the best, that I deserve someone more faithful. I hung up on her. Couldn't believe she was buying Nate's lies. But then Carol did something I didn't expect. She went to my mom's house the next day with a folder full of evidence. Text messages going back months, emails, pictures Nate had sent her. It was all there in black and white. Turned out my brother had been planning this for a long time. Even before Dad got sick, he'd been making comments to Carol about our marriage. Telling her she was too good for me, that she deserved someone more ambitious, more successful. When Dad got sick, he saw his opportunity. The messages showed everything, how he suggested we move in, how he made sure to be around when Carol was feeling lonely and I was grieving, how he gradually worked his way into her confidence. He would text her late at night, saying he understood how hard it must be with me being so distant. Told her she deserved someone who could be there for her emotionally. Classic manipulation tactics. Don't get me wrong, this doesn't excuse what Carol did. She still made the conscious choice to cheat, to betray our marriage vows. But finding out my brother had been plotting this, had been undermining my marriage while our father was dying on his hospital bed. It made me physically sick. I spent that whole night throwing up. Olivia called me yesterday from Seattle. She's filing for divorce. After seeing Carol's evidence, she checked Nate's phone records. Turns out this wasn't his first affair, just the first time he'd gone after someone in the family. She discovered he'd had relationships with several of his female employees over the years. Young, vulnerable women who needed their jobs. Olivia had caught him before, forgiven him, tried to make it work for their kids. But this was the final straw. She's already contacted a divorce lawyer. The family is completely torn apart now. Mom is devastated, keeps calling me crying about how she failed as a mother, how she should have seen what kind of man Nate was becoming. My aunts and uncles are taking sides. Some still think Nate is the victim of Carol's manipulation, they can't believe their successful, charming nephew could be so calculating. Others are disgusted by what he did, saying he's dead to them. Every family gathering turns into an argument about who's really to blame. Carol tried to reach out again, this time through her sister Amy. Wanted to show me more evidence of Nate's manipulation, said she needed me to understand that she was a victim too. She sent screenshots of messages where Nate threatened to tell me she had been coming on to him if she tried to end things. Amy begged me to at least talk to Carol, said she was worried about her sister's mental state. I told Amy that unless it was about divorce proceedings, I didn't want to hear anything from Carol. I feel like I'm living in some kind of twisted nightmare. Every day brings new revelations, new betrayals. The brother I looked up to my whole life turned out to be a predator who targeted vulnerable women, including his own brother's wife. The woman I loved and trusted chose to betray me at my lowest point. And now I have to sit back and watch as my family tears itself apart trying to make sense of it all. Update 2. The situation has gotten even worse, if that was possible. Carol lost her job last week. Her sister Amy called to tell me what happened. Apparently Carol had a complete breakdown at work when she found out Nate was already seeing someone else. One of her co-workers mentioned seeing Nate at a restaurant with a young woman, being very intimate. Carol started crying hysterically in the middle of a client meeting and couldn't stop. Her boss sent her home and called her the next day to say they were letting her go due to recent behavioral issues. After losing her job, Carol showed up at my apartment again. She looked awful, had lost a lot of weight despite being 4 months pregnant now. She kept saying she had nowhere else to go, that she was carrying my niece or nephew, that she needed help. I closed the door in her face. Through the door, I could hear her sobbing, saying Nate had ruined her life, that she lost everything because of him. Security eventually had to escort her out of the building. Speaking of Nate, his true colors are really showing now. He's been on a campaign to salvage his reputation by destroying Carol's. He's telling everyone who'll listen that Carol was obsessed with him, that she threatened to tell Olivia about their affair if he didn't leave her. Says she planned the pregnancy to trap him. The messages Carol showed everyone prove otherwise, but he's claiming they're fake, that she manipulated the timestamps. He even tried to get our mom to convince me to forgive and forget because we're family. Mom came to my apartment last weekend, crying about how we need to stick together now that Dad's gone. Said Nate was sorry, that he'd made a mistake but he was still my brother. I told her the brother I knew died the day he decided to go after my wife. She left in tears. The most shocking revelation came yesterday. My cousin Mike called me. His ex-wife Sarah had seen my original post, guess it got shared around the family, and told him something she'd been keeping secret for years. 3 years ago, when she and Mike were still married, Nate had tried to seduce her too. It happened at a family vacation in Cape Cod. Mike had taken their kids to the beach, and Nate cornered Sarah in the kitchen. Made suggestive comments, tried to touch her, said Mike didn't appreciate her the way she deserved. Sarah rejected him and ran out of the house. She never told anyone because she didn't think we'd believe her. Nate was the golden boy of the family, successful businessman, devoted husband and father. She was afraid Mike would think she was lying, that it would cause problems in the family. She only came forward now because she saw what happened with Carol and felt guilty for not warning anyone about what Nate was really like. After hearing this, I started asking around. Turns out Nate had a pattern. 3 of his former employees reached out privately after hearing about the divorce. All told similar stories. Nate would start by mentoring them, then begin making subtle comments about their appearance, their relationships. He'd organize late-night meetings, offer rides home, gradually push boundaries. 2 of them quit because of his behavior. The third gave in to his advances because she needed the job, then was fired when his interest waned. Olivia wasn't surprised when I told her about Sarah and the employees. Said she'd found lipstick stains on his shirts before, suspicious texts, hotel receipts. She confronted him each time but he always had excuses, business meetings, misunderstandings, jealous employees trying to cause trouble. She wanted to believe him because of their kids. Now she feels guilty for not leaving sooner, for not warning my family about what kind of man he really was. The worst part? Some family members are still defending him. Our Uncle Bob, who gave Nate his first job, says he's being set up by vindictive women. That Carol seduced him and now these other women are piling on to destroy his reputation. He even suggested I was spreading these stories because I was jealous of Nate's success. I had to be physically restrained from punching him at last week's family dinner. I feel like I'm seeing my whole family history in a new light now. All those times Nate was extra friendly with our female cousins' friends, all the young employees who suddenly quit his company, all the business trips that ran mysteriously long. How many other women has he gone after? How long has he been doing this? And how did none of us see it? Update 3. This will be my final update on this whole nightmare. The divorce was finalized last week. Carol didn't contest anything. She signed away her rights to our joint assets, the apartment, everything. Her lawyer said she just wanted it over with. She's moved back to her hometown in Michigan, still pregnant. Her sister Amy told me she's living with their parents now, working remotely for some marketing firm. Nate tried to deny paternity when Carol filed for child support, demanded a DNA test. The results came back last week, 99.9% match. He's now legally required to pay child support, which he's already trying to get reduced. Claims his business is struggling because of false allegations ruining his reputation. The truth is, 3 former employees have filed harassment suits against him after hearing about what happened with Carol. His company's board is considering removing him as CEO. Olivia's divorce went through too. She got primary custody of their kids and half his assets. She's doing better in Seattle, started dating again, got promoted to head nurse at her new hospital. We still talk occasionally. Shared trauma has a way of bonding people. She's been helping me process everything, since she understands what it's like to be betrayed by Nate. The family is still divided. Mom finally stopped defending Nate after the DNA test results and the harassment suits came to light. She's in therapy now, trying to deal with losing Dad and now essentially losing a son too. Some relatives still think Nate is being unfairly persecuted, but most have cut ties with him. Holiday gatherings are going to be awkward for years to come. As for me, I've accepted a job offer in Austin. The company is a major tech firm, better salary, fresh start. I need to get away from all these memories, from constantly running into people who know what happened. My apartment sold quickly, and I'm driving down next week with whatever fits in my car. The rest is going into storage or being donated. Mom cried when I told her I was moving. Begged me to stay, said she couldn't lose another son. I explained that I'm not cutting her off, I just need space to heal. Promised to visit for holidays and keep in touch regularly. She understands, but it's still hard on her. Carol tried to contact me one last time before I leave. Sent a long email about how sorry she was, how the baby just started kicking, how she wishes things were different. Said she's naming him Robert, after me, because despite everything I was the best man she'd ever known. I deleted the email without responding. Her child with my brother is not my concern. Jake helped me pack up my apartment yesterday. Found some old family photos in a drawer, pictures of Nate and me as kids, fishing with Dad, playing baseball in the backyard. Had to stop packing for a while after seeing those. It's still hard to reconcile those happy memories with who Nate turned out to be. Dad would be heartbroken seeing how everything turned out. His 2 sons not speaking, family torn apart, grandchild being born into this mess. Sometimes I wonder what he would say if he were here. Would he forgive Nate? Would he understand why I have to leave? But I know I'm making the right choice. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. Some betrayals cut too deep to move past. Some bonds, once broken, can't be repaired. It's time to close this chapter and start fresh. Thank you all for your support throughout this ordeal. Your comments and messages helped me stay strong when I wanted to crumble. If there's one thing I learned from all this, it's that sometimes the family you choose is more reliable than the family you're born into.